I always believed my marriage was built on something unshakable. Not perfect, never perfect, but steady in the way a good house is steady. You know the kind. The roof may creak in the wind, the paint may peel, but the walls hold. That's how I thought of us. We'd been together since our mid-20s. She was the love of my life, the woman who laughed at my bad jokes, the one who stayed up late with me in our tiny first apartment when we had nothing but a second-hand couch and a mattress on the floor. We survived those early years on cheap pizza, dreams, and the kind of blind faith only young couples can afford. Over time, life layered itself on top of us. Jobs that demanded too much. Kids who turned us into parents before we were ready. Mortgages, bills, endless responsibilities. The passion dimmed, yes, but I thought that was normal. What mattered, I told myself, was that we were a team. She handled the mornings, I handled the nights. She was the heart, I was the backbone. Together, we made it work. If you'd asked me a year ago, I would have said we were safe, solid, ordinary, in the best way. We didn't need fireworks. We had history. We had trust. At least, that's what I believed. What I didn't know then was that stability can be an illusion, and that sometimes the ground gives way beneath you without a sound until you're already falling. It didn't happen all at once, at least not for me. At first, it was just little things, the kind of changes you could easily blame on stress or fatigue. She started going to bed earlier some nights, claiming she was exhausted. Other nights, she stayed up later than me, scrolling her phone in the glow of the living room light. She began spending longer in front of the mirror in the mornings. Not dramatically, just enough that I noticed. A new shade of lipstick here, a new blouse that didn't quite match her usual style. I told myself it was normal. After all, everyone deserves to feel good about themselves. But the biggest change was in her eyes. I'd catch her staring out the window at dinner, her mind somewhere else. When I asked what she was thinking, she'd smile quickly and say, "Nothing." But I knew that look. It wasn't nothing. I convinced myself not to push. I told myself marriage goes through phases, ups, downs, cycles of closeness and distance. I thought if I just stayed steady, the distance would close on its own. But at night, lying in bed, I'd turn to face her, and she'd already be turned away. And in the silence, a quiet fear began to creep in, one I tried desperately to ignore. What if she was slipping away from me, and I didn't even know how to hold on? The more I noticed the distance, the harder I tried to close it. It was almost instinctual, like tightening my grip on something precious, slipping through my hands. I started buying flowers again, the way I used to when we were younger. Not roses. She always thought those were cliché. But the wild-looking bouquets she loved, with sunflowers or tulips. I left little notes for her on the counter before work. "Have a good day, love." Simple, clumsy things that I thought might remind her of us. I cooked dinner on the weekends, fumbling through recipes I printed off the internet. The kids laughed when I burned the chicken, and she smiled politely. But it wasn't the kind of smile that warmed the room. It was thin, almost apologetic. I suggested date nights too. Sometimes she agreed, but even when we were out, her eyes seemed somewhere else. She laughed at the right times, nodded at my stories, but I could feel the gap. It wasn't about the words. It was about the silence that followed them. The truth was, my gestures felt like pouring water into a cracked glass. No matter how much I gave, it didn't fill her. She was slipping, inch by inch, and I was too afraid to admit it, even as it became impossible not to see. And yet, I stayed quiet, because to say it out loud would make it real.
It was late. The kids were in bed, the house quiet in that heavy way it sometimes gets when two people don't know how to speak to each other anymore. She was sitting at the kitchen table, a mug of tea cooling in her hands. I walked in and I knew immediately that something was about to change. Her eyes wouldn't meet mine. Her hands trembled slightly as she set the mug down. When she finally spoke, her voice was low, almost like she hoped I wouldn't hear it. "I need to tell you something," she whispered. My stomach dropped, and then the words came out in fragments, that there had been someone else, that it was just once, that it didn't mean anything, that she regretted it the second it happened. The words didn't land all at once. At first, they hovered in the air like static, my brain refusing to process them. But then they started to sink in, slow, heavy, poisonous. I heard her, but it felt like I was underwater, the world muffled, humming in my ears. I didn't yell. I didn't slam my fists on the table. I just sat there, staring at her, the woman I thought I knew better than anyone. And all I could think was, how do I ever look at you the same again? The tea between us went cold, and so, I think, did something inside me.
Her confession hung in the air like smoke I couldn't breathe through. She said the words just once. I don't know why. It didn't mean anything, but they echoed louder than anything she had ever said to me before. I felt the weight of them pressing on my chest, and for a moment I thought I might break apart right there in front of her. But I didn't explode. I didn't throw the mug across the room, or slam doors, or demand names. Instead, I stood up. My chair scraped across the tile, a sharp sound that made her flinch. I grabbed my jacket and walked out. I didn't even know where I was going. I just knew I couldn't breathe in that kitchen anymore. I walked through the streets like a ghost, my hands shoved in my pockets, my thoughts a hurricane of disbelief and pain. Every lit-up window I passed felt like a stab. Families inside laughing, couples watching TV together, people still living in the comfort of trust. Hours blurred. The cold seeped into me, but I barely noticed. All I could see was her face when she said the words. All I could hear was the silence that followed. When I finally came home, it was almost dawn. The house was quiet, the kids still asleep, blissfully unaware that their world had just tilted. I didn't look at her. I just walked upstairs and checked on them, needing to see their small, peaceful faces to remind myself why I had to keep standing. But inside, something had collapsed. Something I didn't know if I could ever rebuild. The morning after her confession, the world didn't stop. The kids still needed breakfast. Lunchboxes had to be packed, homework checked, clothes ironed. I went through the motions like a machine. Every action automatic, my chest heavy like there was a stone lodged inside it. She tried to speak to me that day. Her voice was softer than I'd ever heard it, trembling with apologies, promises, desperate words about how it meant nothing, how she wanted to fix things. But all I could hear was that phrase on repeat in my head, someone else. Walking away should have been simple. People say if they cheat, leave. But reality is messier than advice. We had 2 children who still thought their parents' love was unbreakable. We had a mortgage, years of memories, lives intertwined so tightly that unraveling them felt like tearing out my own skin. So I stayed. Not because I forgave her, not because I was ready to try again, but because I couldn't bring myself to shatter our children's world the way mine had just been shattered. At night, I'd lie in bed staring at the ceiling, the silence between us louder than any scream. And in that silence, I asked myself the question that haunted me most. Was staying the brave choice? Or was it just cowardice dressed up as sacrifice? The strangest part was how normal everything looked from the outside. The house was the same. The kids still ran down the hall in the mornings, fighting over cereal boxes. We still attended soccer games and parent-teacher conferences. From the outside, we looked like a family. But inside, it felt like we were ghosts haunting the same house. She moved around me like I was made of glass, fragile, dangerous, something she didn't know how to touch anymore. I noticed how she'd pause before entering a room I was in, as if bracing herself. Her laugh, when it came, sounded rehearsed. At night, the bed that once felt too small for us now felt like a canyon. I'd lie on my side, staring into the dark, listening to her breathing. Sometimes I'd hear muffled sobs, and I'd clench my fists, torn between wanting to comfort her and wanting to stay silent so she knew exactly what she'd done to me. The children started to feel it too. Our oldest asked me once, "Dad, are you mad at Mom?" I froze, caught between honesty and the desperate urge to protect their innocence. I told him no, that grown-ups just get tired sometimes. But I saw the doubt in his eyes. Kids know when love has soured, even if you try to hide it. Every day I felt myself splitting in 2. The father, trying to keep their world steady, and the husband who could barely look at his wife without seeing betrayal. And the longer it went on, the more I wondered, was I keeping the family together? Or was I just teaching my children what it looks like to live in a home where love has died? It happened on a Tuesday night, one of those evenings that looked ordinary from the outside. The kids were asleep, dishes done, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound in the kitchen. She sat at the table, spinning her wedding ring slowly around her finger, staring at it like she was deciding whether to keep wearing it. I couldn't take it anymore. Weeks of silence, weeks of pretending, weeks of acting like we weren't both drowning. My chest was heavy, my throat tight, but I forced the words out. "What are we doing?" She looked up at me, startled. Her eyes glistened, but she didn't answer right away. Finally, she whispered, "I don't know if we can keep living like this." I felt something snap inside me. Anger surged, but it wasn't loud. It was cold, measured. I told her I couldn't trust her, that even if she swore it was only once, my mind replayed it over and over, torturing me with images I never asked for. That her mistake had become a part of me now, a weight I carried every single day. She didn't argue. She didn't defend herself. She just nodded, tears spilling silently, as if she had already accepted that my words were true. In that moment, I realized we weren't fighting for our marriage anymore. We were standing at the edge of a cliff, both of us too afraid to admit that one wrong step had already sent us tumbling. And for the first time, I asked myself, were we trying to save our love, or just trying to avoid admitting it was already gone? There comes a point where the silence becomes unbearable, where every glance feels like a reminder of the wound that never closes. One night I reached that point. It was late, the house quiet. I stood in our bedroom staring at the closet. Then I pulled down a small duffel bag. I wasn't even thinking. My body just moved. Shirt, jeans, socks, toothbrush. Not everything, not even most things. Just enough to get away, to breathe. The zipper was louder than I expected. She walked in, and for the first time in weeks, real panic filled her eyes. She asked me what I was doing, her voice cracking like glass. "I can't breathe in this house," I said. My voice was steady, but my hands were shaking. "I can't look at you and not see it." She broke down, begging, pleading, saying she knew she had destroyed us, but that she would do anything, therapy, honesty, rebuilding brick by brick, if I would just give her the chance. For a moment, I hated myself for even listening, for even pausing, because part of me wanted to walk right out that door and never look back. But then I thought of the kids, asleep upstairs, dreaming their small, safe dreams, unaware of the storm brewing below. And I froze. My hand tightened on the bag, but my feet wouldn't move. Slowly, I set it down. "I'm not staying for you," I whispered. "I'm staying for them." I walked past her into the living room and sat in the dark until dawn. I had stayed, but not out of love, out of duty. And deep down I knew the difference would haunt us both. I thought I was doing a good job hiding it, that I could shoulder the weight and still smile at the right times, still laugh at their jokes, still tuck them into bed as if nothing had changed. But kids are sharper than we give them credit for. They sense the shifts adults pretend to ignore. Our oldest asked me one evening, almost casually, "Why don't you and Mom laugh together anymore?" The question hit me like a punch to the gut. I stumbled for words, muttering something about stress, work, grown-up problems. But I saw it in his eyes. He didn't believe me. He already knew something was broken. Our youngest reacted differently. She became clingy, following me from room to room, curling up next to me on the couch, even crawling into our bed some nights. She didn't ask questions, but her little arms around me said enough. She was afraid of losing something she couldn't name. The hardest part wasn't their questions or their fear. It was knowing that no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't protect them from the truth that seeped through the walls of our home. The silence at dinner. The way I sat on one end of the couch while their moms sat on the other. The absence of small touches, the missing laughter that once filled the house. And I hated myself, because while she was the one who betrayed me, I was the one failing to shield them from the fallout. They were watching their parents unravel piece by piece, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. It was her idea. She said if there was even a sliver of hope, we owed it to the kids to try. At first, I wanted to refuse. What good would sitting in a stranger's office do? No therapist could erase what I saw every time I looked at her. But in the end, I agreed. Maybe out of duty. Maybe out of fear of what it would mean if I said no. The first session was brutal. We sat on opposite couches, not holding hands, barely looking at each other. She spoke first, about guilt, about how she had lost herself, how it wasn't about me, how she regretted it more than anything. Her voice cracked, tears sliding down her cheeks, but I felt nothing but a hollow ache. When it was my turn, I told the truth. I said I couldn't touch her without seeing him. I said I love you now sounded like a lie. I said I felt poisoned by the betrayal, and even if I wanted to, I didn't know how to drain the venom from my chest. The therapist listened, nodded, said healing was possible, that marriages had survived worse. She spoke of rebuilding trust, brick by brick, small steps. But as we left the office, the silence in the car felt heavier than it had before. Because the truth was, I didn't feel hope. I felt exhaustion. Therapy wasn't a lifeline. It was a mirror, showing me just how broken we already were. I thought therapy might numb the pain, give us tools to patch over the cracks. Instead, it ripped them wide open. Every session was like reopening a wound I had barely managed to keep from bleeding. She cried often, speaking about how much she hated herself for what she did, how it was never about me, how she still loved me. But those words, "I still love you," sounded like nails on glass. If she had loved me, how had she chosen someone else, even for a single night? When it was my turn, the bitterness poured out. I told her I couldn't trust the way she looked at me, couldn't stand how her phone lit up at night without flinching. I admitted I pictured her with him constantly, uninvited images replaying like a movie on loop. The more I spoke, the more I realized how much poison I'd been carrying in silence. The therapist called it progress, said honesty was the first step. But to me, it didn't feel like progress. It felt like dismantling a house brick by brick, only to find there was no foundation left to rebuild on. And every time we drove home in silence, I knew deep down that therapy wasn't saving us. It was just showing us how far gone we already were. For years, the idea of being without her felt unthinkable. She was my partner through every milestone. The first cramped apartment, the long nights with newborns, the bills we barely managed to pay. She was stitched into every part of my adult life. Losing her felt like losing the ground under my feet. But after the betrayal, after therapy, after the endless silences, I started to picture what it might look like. At first, the thought came as a wave of panic. Divorce, splitting holidays, empty half of the bed, the kids asking why. It felt unbearable. And then, slowly, it began to feel like relief. I imagined waking up without the heaviness in my chest, without the constant reminder of what she'd done. I imagined laughter returning to the house, even if it was just mine and the kids. I imagined freedom from the questions that kept me up at night, freedom from the mistrust, freedom from the way her apologies rang hollow, no matter how sincere they sounded. The scariest part wasn't imagining it. The scariest part was realizing that it didn't scare me anymore, that the idea of life without her wasn't a nightmare. It was starting to feel like the only way forward. And in that realization, I knew something had shifted. I wasn't clinging to the wreckage anymore. I was starting to wonder if it was time to finally let go. For months after her confession, she was the one reaching out. She'd suggest therapy, try to touch my arm in the kitchen, offer soft apologies when she thought I was listening. I never gave her much back, but she kept trying. At least, until the night I noticed she'd stopped. We were on the couch, the TV flickering in the background, some show neither of us cared about. Usually she'd steal glances, waiting for me to say something, anything. But that night she didn't look at me once. Her eyes stayed fixed on the screen, her body still, like she'd finally accepted what I had been giving her. Nothing. Later, when I asked if she wanted to talk, she just shook her head. "I'm tired," she said. But it wasn't the kind of tired sleep could fix. It was a surrender. It hit me then she was starting to imagine life without me, too, the same way I had been. And for the first time, the house didn't feel like it held two people clinging to a broken marriage. It felt like it held two people quietly preparing to let it end. And there was no fight left, no desperate reaching across the gap. Just silence, calm, steady, terrifying. And I knew the end was no longer a question of if, only when. It didn't end with a fight. There were no slammed doors, no screaming matches, no ultimatums. It ended the way so many things do, quietly. One evening we sat at that same kitchen table where she had first confessed, and this time neither of us had anything left to argue for. We spoke calmly, almost like business partners dividing assets. Who would stay in the house, how we'd tell the kids, how birthdays and holidays would work. We promised each other we would keep them safe, that no matter what happened between us, they'd never doubt how loved they were. She moved out 2 weeks later. I stayed in the house with the children. Watching her pack her things was surreal. 15 years of marriage condensed into boxes and bags. I wanted to rage, to cry, to cling to something. But I felt emptied out, hollow. The first night without her was unbearable. I reached across the bed out of habit and found nothing but cold sheets. But then, slowly, the silence began to feel different. Not heavy with betrayal, but open, like space waiting to be filled. I won't pretend I'm healed. Some nights I still hear her voice in my head, still feel the sharp sting of her words. But I'm learning. I'm cooking dinners with the kids. I'm laughing with them again, not pretending, but genuinely laughing. I'm rediscovering parts of myself I buried under years of routine. She broke me, but she also forced me to face the truth, that I had been living in a marriage I thought was safe, when in reality, it was already slipping away. We weren't perfect. We weren't forever. But we were real. And now, for the first time in a long time, so am I.